Paris and a murder mystery. It sounds like the perfect combination, but is it? Hello and welcome to Larry Has Opinions. Today I'm talking about the latest novel by Lucy Foley, The Paris Apartment. Usual disclaimer, I received a free copy from the publisher in exchange for an honest review. I always like to know as little as possible about the books that I'm starting, and that's especially true of mystery or thriller books. So I'm gonna give you a brief synopsis, but I'm gonna keep it very, very light. In The Paris Apartment, we follow Jess, who's an English girl who's traveling from Brighton to Paris. And we get the sense that she's running away from something. She's either leaving a bad situation behind or perhaps she's done something herself. And she's traveling to Paris because that's where her brother lives. And as she gets to Paris, she realizes that Ben, her brother, actually lives in a pretty fancy part of Paris. And she wants to ask him for some accommodation while she can sort herself out. But as she gets to Paris, she suddenly realizes that he's not answering his doorbell, and he stopped answering his phone as well. And things sort of escalate from there. The whole story is narrated through different perspectives, so we follow multiple POVs. And we're not just talking about 2 or 3, but we're, I think, in the high single digits, which is a pretty peculiar choice, I think, because this is a book where obviously information is being withheld from us, and it's somewhat difficult to believe that a lot of these characters would not have in their thoughts a lot of the things that we're not allowed to find out at that point in time. So it's a bit of a tricky balance to get right. I think Foley just about gets it right, she just about pulls it off, but I'm not sure that would have necessarily been my preference or my first choice for the execution of this sort of story. None of the characters is particularly likable, I would say. Pretty much every one of the characters that we follow is flawed to a large extent. And that I don't mind at all. I kind of like in a way as well. But I know some people prefer to have a story where you have a positive character that you can fully root for. Here, you're probably inclined to root for Jess, who's this English girl that's trying to find out what's happening, but at the same time she's a very flawed character as well, so you kind of warned there. There's also a fair amount of stereotypes that are depicted in the story, especially when it comes to the French and the French environment, but it's nothing as bad as Emily in Paris or anything like that. And obviously it leans somewhat heavily into the whole different nationalities, given that Jess and Ben are English and a lot of the other characters are French. I find it was okay. Like, it wasn't necessarily the most accurate cultural description, but on the other hand, this is, a thriller book. This is not some sort of academic treatise on the subject. So I found overall, I think it was decently executed. And as someone who's relatively familiar with the city of Paris, I have to say that the setting was definitely one of the things that I enjoyed the most about the book, being able to recognize some of the spots in the city that are described in the story, and it just felt very atmospheric overall. So from that perspective, that's definitely something that I very much appreciated in the story. The whole story is told in first person present tense, which is typically not my preference. I find that it cheapens the narration a little bit, at least for my individual taste. That said, the prose was always pretty straightforward, pretty satisfying, and pretty effective, so I can't really falter too much for that. The different characters, they all sounded a bit samey, to be honest, given that we were following so many different characters with such different backgrounds from a personal, professional, cultural perspectives. I'm not sure she fully pulls it off, given the ambition of having so many POVs. On the other hand, I would say overall, the narration and the prose felt always competent, even though I might not describe it as particularly impressive. It was definitely a page turner and definitely easy to get through. That said, the pacing is not necessarily the fastest, so depending on what your typical reference point is, if you're used to reading a lot of literary fiction or slow-paced book, this might feel quite fast-paced. But on the other hand, if you're used to thrillers and really fast-paced books, this might feel a bit on the slower side. So this is kind of somewhere in between, I would say, which didn't bother me in the slightest either way. But it's just to give you an idea of what this read like, at least for me. I have not read any of Foley's previous works, so I don't really have a reference point when it comes to her other books. But as far as I'm concerned, when I pick up a thriller, the main things I'm looking for is that I want to be entertained and I want to be surprised. And all in all, I have to say it worked on both counts. There was always enough going on and enough that was being revealed that it made me want to keep going. So from that perspective, really kept my interest, and it really kept me entertained throughout the story. And when it comes to being surprised, there were definitely a couple of twists that I did not anticipate. So that's always satisfying for me. The first one is kind of in the middle of the book, which, as I said, I didn't see coming. And then at that point, I started getting worried that the second half of the book sounded like it was becoming a bit of a slow, full reveal of what had sort of become obvious. But I have to say that wasn't necessarily the case, because towards the end, again, there was more being revealed that really, again, caught me by surprise. So I have to say that all in all, it was quite a satisfying read for me. Was it the most memorable thriller that I've ever read? Probably not. I'm possibly going to forget most about the story in a few months. But that said, was it enjoyable and satisfying enough as a read for this genre book? I think it was. So for all these reasons, my rating for the book is 8 out of 10 and a thumbs up overall. I hope you guys like this video. Please subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of these reviews. Join our Discord if you want to discuss your favorite thrillers or anything else with our community. And I'll see you the next time.